Hello everyone, this is Vera from Veriterra Lab, and this video is about compost maturation stage. For each style of composting it is something different. I am the most experienced in hot or thermophilic composting, specifically hot composting method taught by Elaine Ingham and the Soil Food Web School. I've done a few piles using this method, and this video will be based on my experience and also experience of other Soil Food Web students, graduates, compost producers operating in different climates, but mostly focused on California climate. So let's start with the definition. In thermophilic composting, the maturation phase is when a compost pile or windrow cooled down to ambient temperatures and you let it sit longer before using without mixing, turning or any other kind of disturbances. You can actually use it right away if you checked it and beneficial microbes are above minimum requirements, but if you let it mature, then the amount and diversity of microbes will increase. So according to the Soil Food Web School, the maximum diversity can be reached in 6-9 months, and in about 2 years microbes will run out of available food and the numbers will decline. I saw pretty good increase in numbers and diversity in about 3-4 months, so if you need to use it earlier, it's totally fine. I also have leftovers of the pile that I made a year and a half ago, and it still has pretty good numbers of microbes. So now let's talk about how to take care of compost in maturation phase. In maturation phase, we want composting process to continue, and to do this job, microbes need water. Also, composting is aerobic process, so we want good levels of oxygen in our pile. We don't want to grow anaerobic microbes and create harmful material. Oxygen can't easily move through water, so it's kind of also related to moisture levels. And to make our job easier and protect compost from damaging environmental factors, the location is also important. So maintaining compost during its maturation basically comes down to choosing the right location and maintaining the right moisture and oxygen levels. And the moisture is probably the most important factor. Let's talk about location first. There are a few factors to consider: sun, wind, cold, things like rain and snow, and also animals, rodents and other creatures. So ideally you want to keep your compost in shade to protect it from heating and sunlight. It's not always possible for large windrows in open spaces, but I know that you can order tarps that have light natural color that reflects light, unlike black tarps that accumulate heat. To protect a pile from wind from drying up, you can find a place next to the wall, fence or trees, or you can build a special structure for that. Tarps, covering with tarp also works, but not as effective as other methods. I was keeping my last piles in windy location, and the side of the pile facing the wind was always drier. So if you are in the same situation, then you just need to do a better job on keeping the moisture. For cold, freezing winters, you may consider placing compost inside the building. You can also use some kind of insulation like blankets, and covering with tarp is necessary to protect from melting snow and from this cold freezing water getting into the pile. If compost froze, there is still a chance that microbes will revive back in spring, and in my limited experience I find that freezing is less detrimental than drying. So that was more about climate and weather factors, but I also want to talk about animals that can become interested in your pile. It's not like we are trying to keep our pile in sterile environment, because bugs and worms, they are helpful and they bring diversity, but sometimes it can be overwhelming. I put one of my piles in a location full of roly-poly bags, and they literally infested my pile. I appreciate them crushing and helping decompose stubborn, waxy magnolia leaves, but I think they were eating fungi as well and affecting my numbers. And it was just too much of them, and it can be not good for plants as well. Another thing is rodents. For example, if you are composting in a location where rats are abundant, then you may consider keeping your maturing pile in hardware cloth, absolutely covered. Even though rodents are less interested in maturing piles than in actively cooking piles, they still can disturb it and they can start nesting there. Okay, so we already touched the topic of compost moisture. Now let's go into more detail. As I said, maintaining moisture is the most important part of maintaining maturing pile. It's not only necessary for keeping microbes alive and actively working on your pile, but it's also specifically crucial for fungal growth. Fungi don't like stress, they don't like changing moisture levels, wet and dry periods. They need consistent moisture to grow. So based on my experience and experience of other soil food web composters, I came to conclusion that if compost is chunky with all these air pockets between wood chips, then it's best to keep it at 50% free moisture level for maximizing the amounts of microbes. It's when you squeeze it and you can see 1 or 2 drops coming out of your fingers. And if compost has fine texture, then it's better to keep it about 40% free moisture level. It's when you can't squeeze any water out of it, but the material is sticky and holds together. I noticed that with fine compost at high moisture levels, it can get a little bit waterlogged, and I can see signs of low oxygen conditions like ciliates and more over my seeds. Also less fungi and beneficial protozoa go into dormancy. But the exception would be if you added worms into this kind of compost. To maintain moisture at these levels, check moisture preferably every day in different areas in the center and in the sides of the pile, and then mist with water until the moisture is right. It takes a lot of practice to define how much water you need every time. The frequency depends on the weather and the climate you are in. For example, in some arid locations, you might have to mist the pile twice a day. In some areas, it's only 2 or 3 times per week or less. In California, when I was watering my pile twice a week, the outside layer was always dry and it looked more like mulch. So if you don't want to lose the part of your pile, this outside part, then check moisture more often and water accordingly. To keep moisture in your pile between waterings, you need to cover your compost with a tarp. You don't have to suffocate your pile and cover it all the way to the ground. Just keep a little bit of distance between the edge of the tarp and the ground level for airflow. If you keep your compost on a pallet, then you probably can cover it all the way to the pallet. Storing compost on pellets can help with drainage, but it's totally fine to keep it straight on the ground. And I also wanted to add about tarps. They are very helpful when it's raining because they protect compost from all this excessive moisture and prevent it from getting anaerobic. Another thing that can help keep precious moisture in your pile is worms. You can add composting worms straight into your pile, or you can add your pile into your worm composting system, like CFT. Worms can also naturally come from soil, and they are not only good for moisture levels, they also add diversity with microbes from their guts. They help prevent pathogens and they help decomposition. So that's all from me today. I hope this was helpful. Have a nice day and best luck on your composting journey.